So hi everyone, welcome to the Academy of Advanced Thought. And so today I have the absolute privilege of interviewing Minter Dial, who I've known now for a few years, although the last couple of years in all of our lives has been blurry enough to mean that this could have been many more years or many fewer. Minter almost goes without introduction due to his extremely varied and wide career. Anyone who has a cursory look at LinkedIn will see his years at L'Oreal and Redken as general manager, managing director, international partnership development, all kinds of other things, before board seats at lastminute.com and podcast involvements, and now an even more exciting project, arguably, because it's the subject of what we're talking about today. But I won't introduce any of that side of things, and we will head into this rabbit hole to discuss the importance potentially of discussions, if not the importance of thinking in different ways. And everyone who's watching this, and thank you to the 57,000 of you who continue to follow the people that I'm interviewing rather than my followers. I'm convinced that every subscriber is based on the quality of the other people as opposed to the host. And so, yeah, I've welcome Minter. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Jonathan, lovely to be here.
Fabulous. So just before we started recording, you asked me a question, which I've now decided I'm going to turn around on you, because that seems fair. And you asked me, what is the big gamble you've made this year? What's the big chance you've taken? And I'd really like to know your answer to that. And it could be the year as in today being the 13th of April, 2022, to the beginning of this year, or it could even be the last 12 months. What's going on for you that's the most exciting?
Well, let me tell you a little story, Jonathan, because let's say it's not specific to this year, but it was one of those kind of bucket list ideas where I wanted to see the dead on Halloween. And so I decided to take an airplane to go to Los Angeles, and I saw the dead on Halloween at the Hollywood Bowl. And it was an outdoor venue, 20,000 people. And here's the crazy part. Well, I took a flight that had a stopover, and on the flight over the Atlantic, the guy 2 rows behind me died. So I actually saw the dead on Halloween in a way I didn't expect. I was, of course, hoping to go see the Grateful Dead at Hollywood in LA. Anyway, so I ended up going to that show, and when I just landed in LA, my friend with whom I was going to the show sent me a text message, because I didn't have a data plan. I just Wi-Fi routes whenever I get it, and he says, "Hey, Minter, I'm so sorry. I just came down with COVID." So the man with whom I was going to the show, I've been to see many shows with him in the past. Now I have an extra ticket. And anyway, it turned out, so I went solo all the way there to see the dead. Wow. Of course, I never feel solo because it's my kind of environment. And anyway, I had quite the experience, Jonathan. Let me say it was sort of epic, just heroic by another term. And that was because of the bag of funny looking kind of mushrooms. And and then the second thing, which is related, is that on the September 13th of this year, I've decided to gather together friends with whom I went to see the very first Dead show I ever attended, which was back in 1981, in October 81, at the Rainbow Theatre in London. And while the Dead aren't coming back to London because they're basically all sort of at the end of their careers, should we say, there's a cover band that's playing in London. And so I want to hire a Mini, because I went to that first show in a Mini Morris, with one man who's 6'6" and 2 other rowers from my school. And that's a sort of a lasting image. And we're going to go see this cover band who are coming to London to play at the O2 Shepherd's Bush, September 13. And the last time I was with this group of people was only back in 1981.
Wow. And so you've never actually been in the same place at the same time since 81?
No, that's for sure.
and you're going to hire a Mini. And it begs
just for the effect.
Just for the effect. But I mean, it begs the question: where are you going to park?
Well, probably really far away to get an Uber.
That's right. Wow. So what I imagine is that there's a kind of a tribal. I don't know. Is it a tribal that there's a gathering? Sometimes when you gather, I mean, I remember on my 40th birthday, my old band got together, and the last time we played together was 21 years earlier. And this is about 10 years ago now, but and that when we met up again for rehearsal, we did one rehearsal before the gig. And anyone watching, don't do a gig on your own birthday, because you spend the entire time in logistics, no time meeting any of the 60 relatives that have arrived. And I just spent the last hour apologizing. Yeah, exactly.
Noted.
I spent the last hour of the gig, after the gig, apologizing to the people, some of whom had actually flown in to the UK. Anyway, but the feeling of the band getting back together again, the tribe reconnecting, it's almost like it was a bit almost cliche to the fact that we all knew we'd spent so much time with each other, even though we're only together for 3 years. That was kind of 355 out of 365 days. What's that?
That's Jerry. Hi, hello. In case you didn't see me.
Does he look that good in real life?
Well, yeah, we died in October, August 1995.
That's right. So I mean, do you feel, is this a feeling of a renewal of brethren? Is there something there without being too hyperbolic? What's the feeling?
No, absolutely. Well, that's the thing, is, you know, I'm the band itself are, you know, in their 80s, and so there's a total feeling of nostalgia. And the other thing, which can, you know, come out of that story, is that I didn't feel alone at all in that setting. I've seen them a couple of hundred times, so it's sort of maybe part of my gestalt to be part of it, and it felt great.
I'm not surprised at all. One of the things that I'm liking about what you're doing at the moment, and at the end of this, we'll give more directions of where people can find out, but just in case some people drop off before the end of this, I want to talk about the dialogos that you're running at the moment and why, because it seems that, I mean, for me, I can see an analogy between a feeling of being at home, let's say in a banded environment, watching a band or playing in a band or whatever. I feel very much at home having conversations with people with insight and various different perspectives. It's kind of like a comfort zone for me. I feel that I don't really need to know what's going to be said. I certainly don't need to know what the other person's going to say, let alone what I need to say, or which direction things go in, because it's like being at home, being inside dialogue. So can you tell us about what your latest project is?
Sure. And I think I should maybe highlight what is the trait that allows for that to happen most frequently, and that is curiosity. Because you're open and desiring to hear and to learn somehow. And that's probably the most singularly important trait to have in the spirit of dialogos. So I've published 4 books, and each time I've done it differently, whether it's with somebody else, different publishers, self-published, hybrid publishing, each time a different path. And so the challenge I laid down for myself this year, Jonathan, was to write a book in a different style to sort of complement these other more traditional ways, which were, you know, creating a book at the end of the day, but through a different path. And the path that I've chosen is very much inspired by the Charles Dickensian type of style, where I'm publishing the book week by week in public with a structure that I've already premeditated. But I want to do it in a way where it allows for conversation to happen all along, which will naturally influence and participate in the narrative as I go forward, even if I have a full structure. So what I'm doing is called Dialogos. I'm using Substack, the platform that was invented or put in place in 2017 to highlight good writing. And it's a platform that it enables people to subscribe for free or pay if they see some value in it. And so I'm very happy to have free subscribers. They're participant, they can check out what I'm writing, and I'm always trying to write every week one short little blip, one short little provocation, or a topic that's a little bit tendentious or tricky. And then the longer article, which is part of the book, which will look at big topics. Why has it got to this position where we no longer have civil debate in society? So your attitude towards having interesting learning and not worried about sort of what the other person is going to say is quite rare. And what we see today is a whole lot of people struggling to have deep, meaningful argument or discussions, conversations, where you feel like you're both learning from each other as opposed to yelling at each other.
Mm. Well, I think it's admirable. I must admit, we have several times in our careers seem to have come up with relatively similar or parallel track lines. One of the outcomes of the Academy of Advanced Thought, when I get to 50, that is not only 50 years old, which is in February, but also 50 in terms of episodes, of which this is 42. Those will be transcribed and available in various different forms, and also as audio on Spotify, and also as a book and so forth. But what I admire about what you've done here, and I've only been a subscriber for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but it's the type of writing that you are able to produce is like why I started reading The New Yorker, or rather the type of writing is the style of The New Yorker as it was, and originally The Atlantic as well, to be honest, less so now. But The New Yorker, I always felt that there was something in the editorial pieces that made me think. And 99.9% of the stuff that I read as a common kind of practice, and I have hundreds of different RSS feeds all day, using Feedly as my kind of filter mechanism, and I've got LeoBot, which is the kind of the AI that's supposedly finding things that are of different tracks. One of the things I've realized in this is that 99.9% of that stuff, I can tell the whole point by the headline. Whereas what you seem to be doing is unpacking different thoughts in real time. And what I wanted to ask was, are these things that are your, do they tend to be your thinking as complete thoughts, or are they thinking that is happening over time? So for instance, as you're writing them, are you thinking new angles, or have you thought of the angles that you then express?
So the idea of a complete thought is by itself a head scratcher.
Yeah.
I mean, what is your thought, for example? Did you have the free will to have that thought? Or was it influenced by something you might have seen or felt?
Yeah.
So even your thoughts are complete, but not necessarily independent. They are always influenced. And so I am absolutely hoping for sort of installments and pushbacks and these types of elements, which will help form and inform the ongoing discussion. I think that's part of what I'm trying to do, is keep that flexibility. Because, by the way, I might do something wrong. For example, I might say something that's inaccurate. I'd be loved if people will come in and say, "Hey, Minter, call me out. That's not good." So I want it to be a journey.
Yeah, and when you say wrong, that's, you mean in this perspective, the subjective context of wrong. I mean, for instance, the most recent, at the time of recording, the most recent thought, if you like, is around well, are all addictions bad? And what I found brilliant about that, it was published 16 hours ago, so I had it this morning. what I found the most useful about that was that you're looking at the etymology mainly around where it comes from, the Latin and so forth. And I think really what you're doing is asking questions rather than stating facts. And you then, of course, caveat it by saying that, I'm purely raising this point for discussion, and I know it's sensitive and so forth. I've always toyed with where I sit on the spectrum of how incendiary by mistake I could be, how provoking, and I would love to know what your view of that is. And just as a proof mechanism, I think, and any subscribers would realize there's been several in the Academy that have gone about as far deep as you could go into a topic that someone's going to be offended at some stage. I did one talk with called Guns and Violence, which was with a pro Rifle Association card carrying, gun toting member, and a kind of a Buddhist hemp CBD oil specialist from Portugal. And that conversation, but then the week later or 2 weeks later, there was a conversation called "Are we all racist?" So I think I've toyed with how much provocation can be had, but without being too salacious. So where do you sit on that spectrum? Does that change per topic?
Yeah, it does absolutely change per topic. And I suppose my maybe starting gambit is that I want to push into these topics and based on the topic itself, see how far we can go.
Yeah.
To bring people along. So in this particular article, I was really trying to take something that is typically considered poor,
mm-hmm.
and move it into a space through the tool of etymology that suggests that maybe the word addiction also had positive nuances from the past, and with that as a sort of a platform says, well, maybe addiction can be a good thing at times, as opposed to what we typically do, stereotype, generalize very quickly negatively what is addiction. So this is a around the word addiction, but I'm going to be doing these types of things into many topics, like, are we racist? And the challenge, of course, for me, Jonathan, as a white male, is that's as triggery, as challenging a place to be. So the wrong you were mentioning before is absolutely to push back on where I'm maybe thinking inaccurately or feeling inappropriately what is allowable. And yet I feel like we need, as a society, to get back to the ability to use words that today feel a little bit hijacked.
Yeah.
And we got to a point where we are no longer free to use words in case they might trigger some people. And so the challenge we have now is just how far we can push back and regain some words and speak properly, with intention, with vivacity, and not have everyone feeling the need to run to a safe space all the time. Because if we do stay in the safe space mode, I mean, there are certain topics where we need to be smart about how we're doing it. And I want to give an example. But for the most, I really think we need to be allowed to speak normally and regain the words. The sticks and stones, yep. Words different. And so the example I want to give to you, where I'm certainly, I don't feel like I'm off the plot, but PTSD. And there are many forms of PTSD. But when I did my film on the Second World War, I went to do a screening of the film. I've done about 200 of these screenings, but I went to do that screening specifically to a group of 40 veterans of war who had all suffering from PTSD. So these were generally clinically depressed or clinically identified as suffering from PTSD in hospitals, and this was in LA. And so I went down, and there we absolutely have to understand the context and make it as safe as possible, both in the screening of the film as well as the type of conversation we had afterwards, because that's serious business.
Yeah.
And so I don't take lightly this notion of safe space. I just think that we've come to a point where we're kind of safe spacing so much that we're cotton-mouthed and not able to have intense conversations without feeling like we have to caution and qualify every word.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is an overt political correctness gone mad potentially here. That one of my favorite pieces is, again, only up to the time of recording, because there'll be others, is the piece, and I can't remember I'm paraphrasing the title. It's something about how has this divisiveness and lack of proper debate, how have we come up with this? How have we ended up here? From early March, I think, was when I probably first subscribed, and it does kind of bring back the memories of when I first looked into philosophical debate. And I love being in debating societies at college as well. And the origin of a lot of innovation has come from conversations, and even in relatively recent history in the UK, there is the coffee shop conversations were where Lloyd's Bank came from, and the concept of our modern day insurance and so forth. This came from conversations, and I like that. I used to be part of the Socratic dialogue or Socratic cafe movement, and I tried relatively successfully to re-establish that type of thing in the past, and I found there was a significant amount of inertia. So let's say, as a percentage, I'm going to make this percentage up, it's only empirical, not scientific, but let's say there's 30% of people who really embrace the benefit of conversation and dialogue and so forth, especially challenging views. Then there's 30% on the other end of the spectrum who are completely ambivalent to its benefit. In fact, to be honest, would stand against it and say, I had a conversation with someone 2 weeks ago in London who just happened to be training at the same gym as I was training, and the person said to me, "Are you religious?" And my answer to that, which took 3 or 4 minutes to explain, meant that person refused to speak any further on the topic. And then there's 40% of people potentially in between who aren't maybe aware of the fact that having open conversations is possible and probably likely to result in some form of new learning. Do you feel that the inertia how do you feel we can, other than continuing to do things like what we're doing on our platforms, what have you found is the most effective way of putting forward the argument for discussion?
Well, let me start by saying that whenever I talk about this topic, people nod their heads, say, "Oh my God, yeah, we need more of it."
Right.
And I suspect that the best way is actually to engage in a meaningful conversation, because just by doing it, you start firing up all the neurons and some connectivity hormones with the person in front of you, and that is enlivening. It is energizing, and the other forms, this inertia you're referring to, these are entropic. These are taking away of energy from us. And we've got to a point where energy is low. And if people are struggling for it, I think a large part of it is because they have a lack of connection. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we need to reconnect is with people. And what I do is at the end of the book, when I finish the dialogos, I'll look at 3 basic zones with practical models to employ in 3 different spaces. The first will be with friends and family, and taking apart, for example, this notion of close communication bias, where people will tend to think they already know what you're going to say because we know each other so well, and how destructive that is for a relationship with someone who you care about. Then the second group will be with strangers, people you don't know, people you don't have necessarily a common friend who can sort of say, "Oh, well, he likes, Jonathan likes this guy, I like this guy, therefore I like Jonathan. Go out and talk to complete strangers. Now, how does that work? How do you get into meaningful conversations without immediately stoking some kind of a fiery argument or turning them off about like your person about religion? And then the third category is the use of meaningful conversations in work. And so, why would it be useful to have meaningful conversations? Well, for starters, let's look at how many people are disengaged at work. Karl Marx talked about alienation at work, and he was so spot on. Today, the number of people that feel alienated either from themselves and or from the environment in which they are going and spending at least 40 hours a week. This is cutting themselves off from who they are.
Yeah, it's 74%. 74%. Yeah, so Gartner Employee Engagement Survey last year said it was 74% of 30,000 companies interviewed. And that's 74% of people who, quote, are unengaged or proactively disengaged. In other words, they're not just unengaged, they're actually making action toward their disengagement and active pursuance, i.e. they are spending time intentionally doing the opposite of what has been told or guided, or intentionally doing competitor research for job opportunities as opposed to anything else. And
they're saboteurs.
Right. And so, and that 74%, if you look at it from a financial, purely on a fiscal basis, in terms of lack of productivity, is hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of cognitive surplus that's lost in its ability to produce in its most literal form of production. And so I to use Karl Marx's version of produce. And I feel that there's, I don't find it surprising anymore when I find the majority of people disengaged or unengaged due to their lack of resonance of purpose with what's being done. What I find the most surprising, however, is that we tend to spend a lot of time working on our other muscles, and we go and do exercise and we drink kale, but we don't spend a lot of time on our thought muscle, which is why the Academy of Advanced Thought exists, and also my most recent book, The Rise of Advanced Thought. That is because this product, if you like, is due to our lack of prioritization of the thought muscle. And there's several. I could probably count 7 or 8 of your pieces are very much along the lines of why that is, and rightly so, because I haven't done a lot of writing about why that is. Even in The Rise of Advanced Thought, I probably spend a quarter of the book discussing the reasons, but then I spend 3/4 of the book discussing tools that can somehow work our thought muscles, in fact, thought exercises and so forth. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was the Andrew Marr piece around censorship that you wrote about. And in fact, let's take an absolute relatively real time at the time of recording. At the time of recording recently, Will Smith, Chris Rock insulted Will Smith's wife at the Oscars, and Will Smith walks on stage, physically assaults Chris Rock, comes off stage, and then verbally assaults Chris Rock twice. There are several schools of thought. The comedians, so let's put this a broad category of comedians, including Joe Rogan, Russell Brand, and so forth, are saying this is what's gone wrong with society, is we now have these immediate polarization of opinions. And the fact of the matter is that a comedian who's hired to roast people in the audience for fun, that's his job, roasts people in the audience, and then suddenly the audience can physically or verbally abuse the comedian. And then there's the other school of thought, which is, well, there's a line over which it's offensive and disingenuous. And the line that Chris Rock went over was an insult to someone's potential medical condition. Starting from that standpoint and then going into censorship in general, relating to the Andrew Marr article, do you feel that, for instance, comedians should be censored to not say anything that could be offensive?
Well, the answer to that is pretty much no.
Right.
That is, for me, it's an issue of culture here. And if you take comedians in the past, they've always served as the jester, the funny tweak or instigation of a thought that then can lead to debate. And really, that's what artists should be doing, is helping us understand our society. And writers who are blocked for writing certain things. This has happened in many cultures where you get rid of the autodafé, where you get rid of all the books because these are purveyors of the wrong thoughts. So now we're into thought drilling and making us all cater to one singular narrative, which means that we're eliminating debate. So the answer is pretty categorically no. And in this particular case, so one thing I will say is that, well, I wonder how it would have gone down had it been a white man and a black man involved. That would have been a very different type of discussion, but at least right now we don't have that issue. We are able to focus on the specific issue, which is the line of comedians. Whose line is it anyway? And ultimately, you can choose to watch the Oscars or not. And if you get offended by it, well, then turn it off. I think one of the big issues we have is just understanding ourselves. And in the case of Will Smith, to what extent he's able to be aware of himself and the triggers that trigger him. And by the way, he's in a public light, so that goes with the territory. You're obviously never going to have 100% fans, and always things can be said and done wrong. I think where we aren't having success is not allowing for civil debate, in this case around the debate of the red line. That should there be a line, and there's some notions of ethics within this, where there's one group of people that are trying to move the ethics line of society. And right now I think that let's say it's the play for worldwide organization, or the civilization, if you will. And I think it's impossible to all of us to agree on everything all the time, by gum. And so first of all, I think we should institute debate as a compulsory activity at school. It's a phenomenal way to learn to think. It's a phenomenal way to start to gain empathy, because the best debaters know the arguments of the other side, understand them deeply. And that is a super strong skill. And otherwise, we need to really work on who we are as individuals. And I feel like this is like the salient point. When we get into these conversations, the more aware of who you are, the more aware of your weaknesses, the things that trigger you, the baggage that you might be carrying, like with you, your bullying or whatever you've told me about and written about. These are things we carry with us. And if we're not able to lean back into them, they will pop out like a chip on the shoulder in a hurry, which I think has contributed to the fiery and incandescent, hard to manage attitudes and high disputes that we end up having, because people aren't doing the hard work of getting to know themselves in the first place.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. In the college debating societies I was involved with, you were given candidates were given a topic on a Monday, and the debate was on Thursday, and you weren't told which side of the topic you were to represent until you walked on stage.
Oh wow. So
you would go from Monday to Thursday not knowing. And so one of the most famous ones was I am God, discuss. And you either had to have the most convincing argument that all of us are God, or the most convincing argument that there is no such entity as God, less of all one that's personified in human form. And that was one of the ones that was kick-ass. I was like, and so I remember when walking up on stage, and I'm trying to, Dr. Turner, the host, also my biology professor, he whispered in my ear. And you see, by then I'd already done the debates for a couple of years, so true argumentation is not to win. True argumentation is to understand. And so the trick over a few years of debates, and now of course that's now 20, 30 years ago. So, but now it's a well-honed art that both of us have, I feel. But then that was the moment in my life where I understood the power of discussion for inward understanding. Because that 4-day period of which I spent hours and hours, countless hours, arguing both bits round, eventually it wasn't around the argument about God. It was about an argument about me, and what biases I was carrying, and where those biases came from, and all kinds of other stuff. But when you delve that deeply down, then conversations like what happened 2 weeks ago in the gym in London become relatively straightforward, because you can empathize with a capital E all versions of the debate and quite quickly pick up on how would be the most cohesive and resonant conversation structure. And I couldn't agree more that the mandatory inclusion of debates from I mean, one of my best friends, Mary, she's a primary school teacher, and she does this. So she actually brings up debates from 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 7-year-olds, the conversations that they have. and then of course the hangover of that, if you like, is then that they then go home and say, Daddy, if you say you hate your job so much, why do you work so hard? All right. And so what she's done is she's created this bunch of questioning people, but what they're really doing is they're questioning themselves. And I think, although it would take a zooming out to see the needle shift over time, I would place a relatively moderately high-sized bet that some of those people will be in a lot different type of life choice mentality based on what has happened at the age of 5 and 6 and 7, because they're actually inquisitive, right?
I love it. And
that's what I think you're doing that's admirable, and I fully support it.
So let me bring up a topic that you sparked in my mind as we were talking.
Good.
In the realm of conversations. You said the idea is not to win, but to understand. Where does ambition and competition lie if you are engaging in conversation? Are we to absolve ourselves of all need of ambition and competition?
Good question. What a question. I mean, I can answer that question from so many different angles. I'm going to not go down the Zen Buddhism practice answer, which is relatively straightforward. Which, by the way, for anyone listening who hasn't heard me say this 1,000 times on stages all over the world, but actually the two biggest errors that we make as humans is to rely on our greed and fear, and inside that greed and fear spawns the terrible twin sister of comparison. And if were we to set aside greed and fear and comparison, we certainly would not need to have any form of hope or ambition other than to be a nothingness and realize that that's exactly as much as we are worth. Which means inside that nothingness is everything. Therefore, we are the entire universe. So we won't go down that path right now for this particular point.
Love it.
There's only four ayahuasca treatments that help me along that path. So back in what people could call the real world, and for the sake of argument, we'll call it that for now. There is a bias, a heuristic and bias called the argumentative theory of reasoning. And the argumentative theory of reasoning is exactly what Steve Ballmer did wrong at Microsoft, and it's the reason why HMV's bosses and Love Films bosses make such categorical errors over historical times, because they argue points purely so that they can win, as opposed to the point being anywhere near insightful for either party. And so, but this isn't to say that arguments can't be won. And I think one's ambition is something which is purely down to then the intent of that ambition. So if an ambition is to, in a conversation, to get one's point across so that you can add to the melting pot of perspectives, and in a debating society, there is a winner, because then there's a vote of the audience, and the votes, and I was relatively successful in that. And the times that I was less successful were directly proportional to the times where I hadn't actually really delved into myself. I was making points based on logic, whereas in fact, the arguments, as Aristotle would have said, are ethos, pathos, and logos. So yes, there is an ethical requirement for integrity. There's a pathological requirement for emotional resonance, and then there's a logos, the units of logical truth. And so the weakest arguments I've ever made are actually purely logical, and the strongest arguments I've made were the triumvirate. So yes, I think that in our ability, if we have an internal ambition to bring forward a point that would help, or if you're in a hotel and it's sold out and it's pissing down with rain outside and you're 57 miles away from the nearest hotel and you're in the middle of Sweden, making an argument that gets you the unreserved hotel rooms for when the celebrities arrive, which they blatantly aren't going to do in the middle of this place, that argument needs to be won. Otherwise, you're sleeping outside in a bus shelter. And so what I do is, as much as I can, and I'm far from, and this is still a journey for me, and I'm down 1% into my capability, is I turn on the requirement to win when it's absolutely required, but I'm very conscious to turn it off for the rest of the time. And I don't think I did that well throughout my professional career. I think I've spent the majority of my professional career trying to either gain status or recognition, so that I can be more popular, so that I can make more money, so that I can gain more fame. And the reason for all of that wanting is a fear of abandonment, ontologically. And so as soon as I realized why I was doing what I was doing, I was able to realize that the abandonment fear from being given up at birth and so forth was something, if I looked around me, could be negated quite quickly by the amount of people in my close personal network who love me to death, and vice versa. And so, yes, I may have been given up at birth, but the truth is that I now have people around me, and very lucky to be in relationships that are really, really tight and stronger than I could have ever imagined. So yeah, the short answer is ambition, I think, is a turn onable and offable concept. And it's the same as fire on demand. So it's the dawn of human innovation. If you use it unwisely, and when we first learned to create fire on demand, we probably burned ourselves, we burnt our caves, we burnt everything, and then over time you realize you can keep the cave warm, and you can use it against your enemies effectively, and you can heat food so it can be digested more effectively. I think fire on demand and ambition is not dissimilar.
Bless you. It reminds me of the film The Quest for Fire. And when my first book, which is my World War II story, The Lost Ring Home, whenever I autograph the book or sign it, whatever, for people, I always say, always in the search. And then of course, there's a primary sort of significance, which is I'm always in search for the ring. However, really, it's the quest. And the more in touch with your personal quest you are, the stronger you are as you go into these conversations, and the better able you are to identify maybe which is the right ambition switch. When do I need to put it on? And when do I not need to put it on? And you can sort of stay meta at that level. This is the sort of follow-up point is that if we get so cognitively disciplined, where is the place for passion?
Mm. And in fact, to that point, maybe there's maybe that's one half of the same coin, which is, and I've had this several times, people say to me, yeah, but John, surely what you're doing by this is overthinking. Or what room does serendipity have if everything is thought about too much?
Exactly.
And one of the things I enjoy about the various different natural remedies that we are able to enjoy from nature, is that it somehow reduces our overthinking capability, and it becomes more intuitive. Things become more intuitive. I've realized that from the treatments that I've done, the healings that I've done, meditation that I still do, and I feel that one thing I have to keep myself in check of, and I'm terrible for overthinking stuff, and what I tend to do now, rather than overthink things in a fictional way, I tend to try and form structures that I can test the boundaries of. So for instance, if I feel that the weather forecast says that it's going to be rainy tomorrow, even though I've booked a lunch at an outdoor place, the old version of me, the older version, or the most recently older version of me, says, oh God, well, but it's been booked for weeks and we can't get another booking for another few weeks, and it's going to go wrong. We're going to sit outside, it's going to be in the rain and everything else like that. Now what I do is think, well, when was the last time that I saw the weather forecast and it didn't turn out to be the actual case the next day? Well, last week. And so it's like, so actually it's more than a coin flip likelihood that this is not going to actually rain tomorrow, right? But in terms of that, so that's what I tend to test. In terms of passion, I'm a firm and fervent believer at the moment in my life that if you're not doing something that you're passionate about, there is almost no reason to do it. And I say almost because I've been slated a couple of times by saying these things in absolute. My personal belief is that if you're not passionate about something, don't do it. Apart from things that are naturally required to live on, for instance. But I'm softening it nowadays, not to censor myself, but to be appreciative of some people feel as if they are incapable or unable to follow their dreams or follow their passions. I personally don't believe that to be a limiting factor. And I am absolute evidence of this. But that isn't to say that other people may be in circumstances they may feel trapped. You come across as someone who follows their passions exclusively.
Well, I know my passions, and I absolutely I get addicted to them, which is part of why I brought that up. We did mention self-censorship earlier, and Jamar. And so there are two elements of that are worthy of bringing back up right now. One is this notion of words we're not allowed to use, safe spaces, political correctness. The other is I'm not worthy of being able to do this passion, or I don't know how, and so I end up censoring my passion. I don't know who said the thing. It's not that we fail to do big things, is that we succeed to do little things. And so we give ourselves, I'm going to jump a centimeter today kind of task, whereas I really want to leap over the moon. And so we self-censor. And of course, there's nuances in this, which is the delight of real conversations, is challenging and looking at the nuances. But in the end of the day, this notion of self-censorship happens so often, lack of confidence and, self-worthiness. To why should I be allowed to do this? And that also, I think, is a really debilitating concept in the way we approach our lives.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to find a counter argument to that. And so if I were to play devil's advocate, is there ever a time when self-censorship is useful?
Well, yes. So where I might want to say something that would be deeply hurtful to you, and I know it, well, why are you doing that? Maybe that's something you shouldn't say, and actually think about why you wanted to say it.
Is that not what Chris Rock would class as censorship? So if he thought to himself, well, and I'm still advocating this point, well, actually I could say this, but it's going to be hurtful to her. And then he stops himself saying that's self-censorship.
That's right. So they're different contexts. And so his intention is what? What's he trying to do? He's trying to get a rise. He's trying to get television ratings.
Get love. Yeah, yeah.
Well, he's trying to get television ratings. I mean, that's
Ultimate.
really,
yeah. In the same way as all
so,
online platforms are selling advertising, pretty much.
That's it.
Yeah. So it's intense. Yeah.
So be aware of what you're trying to do, and then if you're not comfortable being an ass, then why are you trying to be? Because this is the point: is that first of all, when you get to know who you are, you're always gonna. And Michelle Neverez, who's a delightful individual, she kind of made it very clear. She said, "It takes more than a lifetime to get to know yourself."
Huh. Miles Davis said, it takes a long time to be able to play like yourself.
Well, yeah, that I can totally understand. I think that's beautiful. But the point is that when you have done a significant amount of work on yourself, you will identify parts of you that are darker, that are imperfect, that you don't actually you're not proud of.
Yeah.
So that once you get to that level of awareness, that doesn't mean you then say, well, okay, I'm an axe murderer, I'm going to stick around and you're going to keep on being an axe murderer. No, that's now you need to say, well, oh, now that I'm an axe murderer, maybe I need to improve that part of me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to have that awareness before you start improving yourself.
I agree completely. I think one of the things that I found the most difficult is to be, firstly, to work out who I am. That's taken, I'm still on that journey, but it's taken a decade and a half of psychotherapy, and it's taken all manner of different treatments, meetings and all stuff, a lot of introspection, mainly removal of trying to get out of the way of myself and conscious of how I show up.
The ego.
Yeah. And then the second, then the kind of the related hardship to that, which I found really, really as difficult, is to then be honest with the person you're with or the people you're most closest to about yourself without fear of rejection, especially if you have that particular trauma factor, but to actually be completely naked as a soul in front of someone and say, well, this is me. And there's all of these great bits that you've always loved. And then there's these other bits that I've always hidden because you might not love them as much. And to actually be to try and be as completest as possible. And then to caveat it with the fact that you're still on that journey of discovery.
Right. So
that's brave.
I agree. And I think it'd be lovely to bring up the word of transparency. Because at some level, what you were talking about, there's some sort of radical level of transparency to your closest people. And so the having a transparency on yourself at that level, I think is a beautiful place to be. One should always be allowed to keep secret things. I think it's part of our human condition. We have, there's always going to be a secret garden. And if we expose everything, it's almost like, what's next? There's, I think in our complexity, in the messiness of humanity, I like the idea of keeping some things a little bit secretive. Just to me, it's my little tiny little box where I have a key, where I at least own the key and I know it. So that's sort of a philosophical point. But more,
I'm going to ask you about that. Keep going.
Yeah, but more broadly, the idea of transparency, I think, is again a lovely concept, but absolutely fraught with problems. And we are in a society, and internet helps so much with that, to allow everybody to have a back door on everything. But I think that there's true delight in mystery.
Yes, there's magic.
And there's magic in mystery. And so I think that it's relevant in this topic, both on the transparency with regard to conversation in general. So exposing all of my motivations for having any conversation all the time, you can almost spend most of the time talking about the meta as opposed to the conversation.
Yeah.
And behind calls for transparency, there's always an agenda.
Yeah.
And so I'm what I'm doing here, John, is I'm putting and pushing back on a word that is, in this case, typically regarded positively as opposed to addiction, and allowing for us to circle the wagons a little bit on, well, that word isn't always positive either. Just
And
like
what's also,
addiction is always negative.
yeah, and what's more so is it's almost meme-like. People, in fact, nowadays, if you put the word radical in front of anything, people feel as if that's somehow more meaningful and whatever. In fact, ontologically, radical is as problematic as the word extreme. So, but I think what I also resonate there with a lot is the intent of a level of transparency. Why are you doing? Reason why I feel as if I've had to be far more open about myself to the people around me is because is to address an extremist version of the opposite, which is completely secret. Nowadays, I do see there's a my best friend Emma, we talk about our biological our not even biological, I guess neurological, but our makeup of ourself. And she says, my favorite line of hers, and she says this rarely, and she won't mind me saying this on this show, but she says that she's made up 70% vengeance and 30% mischief. And I just love that, because the mischief part is the bit that I love the most. It's the vengeance part is this kind of like, yeah, fuck it, we're gonna, and this is why, and fuck the system, and all this kind of stuff. And then the other bit is I think where the magic and mystery lives, the mischievous part. And one of the things that I loved about the starting point of your story and in today's chat was that you eventually found out that you were going to be going solo to the Dead concert. And that kind of shit, that really ticks my boxes. I mean, that realization that you then have you're now nowhere near where you live, nowhere near anyone you ever met, but ironically or paradoxically, in an environment where you're safe. And so there's this kind of beautiful freedom with a security of being at a Grateful Dead concert. Therefore, no one's going to kick off. No one's going to spill someone else's pint.
And it's amazing. That's what the power of conversations. I'm having little goosebumps on this one. I went to see the Dead on Halloween. I didn't intend to go by myself, but actually your journey is at its heart a solo journey towards death.
That's true.
And once you can embrace that thought, then you are stronger and better equipped to deal with the shit that does happen. Because that's also the journey. The journey is that we need shit and we need adventure. We need things to happen. Otherwise, we are nothing. We are just bumbling along in some sort of superficial bubble of nothingness. And so what's funny, I can't believe I'm only sort of coming up with this right now, but the idea was, and the Grateful Dead, I mean, the whole philosophy of the Dead, of course, was once you know that you die, then you will be forever grateful in the present. And I think maybe if I characterize the second biggest problem of one, first, not knowing who we are, the second is the fear of death. And in society today, we've got to a point where we don't talk about it. You put the old people in old people's homes. If I can, I use anti-aging cream. And if not, I use some cryogenic, keep me alive forever stuff so my sperm will live on, the immortality bug. Like a Sam Harris might talk about, or Ernest Becker. And so we've in the society, we're not interested in our own deaths. We must live on forever. We are the best. I am perfect. I am indomitable. I am only. And the thing is, we need more we. And so if you're strong with you put on your oxygen mask on you, you get comfortable with the fact that you die, and then you can help others around you with an oxygen mask, ideally, and ironically, to die.
Yes. Well, in fact, the last, without plugging my book, which is available free on Spotify, so I'm not even trying to sell it, but The Rise of Advanced Thought, the last entire section is is a TED talk that I gave that was deleted by mistake by the TED organizers. And all of our TED talks, all the speakers on the day was deleted, so I don't feel as if it's something I said. But the last part of advanced thought is about this. I actually conclude the rise of advanced thought with this point, and perhaps pointing out in multiple different ways how if we were to truly accept the one thing that is absolutely certain in a world of perpetual uncertainty, there's only one thing we can hold on to. And it used to be death and taxes, but I don't even believe the second is completely mandatory, depending on your domiciliation and so forth. But the death part is something that is, I find, fascinating and almost completely globally either seen as something to be in denial of. And actually, I found one of the most interesting concepts at the moment in these conversations that I have around the world with various people is that even talking about death can be seen as bringing it closer toward you, as if somehow that is a factor, which is not
voodoo.
Right, so people who walk under ladders thinking that that's something bad's going to happen to them. It's like, no, I guarantee you something bad's going to happen to you. If you feel as if something that happens to you could be perceived as bad, it's your choice. As Mark Twain once said, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And so the way I kind of look at it is that anything that goes wrong, and all manner of shit's gone wrong in all of our lives, but I see it as what the biopic would, what scene will this look like? I arrived at the airport in London to find that I wasn't able to board the plane, therefore I wasn't able to do all manner of different things. And then stayed in London until I was able to fly out, which meant I had to cancel all manner of different things, all this kind of stuff. And I'm constantly thinking to myself, what does that play like in the biopic? Like, what does that, it's like, wow, this, how's that going to, that doesn't even need to be dramatized. This stuff is too strange for it seems too fictional, no one would ever write this level of shit.
I wanted to do an experiment with you. Someone said that there are two most important days in your life. The first is when you're born, and the second is when you realize what your purpose is on this earth, or who you are. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like there's a 1B, which sort of slots in between 1 and 2, which is when you realize that you are finite. It gets you to 2 much quicker.
Or I thought you were going to say it the other way around. Okay, I would add, I think there's also a 2.1 then. So, or a 2.A or a 2A or 3. I think that can go either way. I think born, realizing our teleology, or telos as the Greeks would call it, i.e. the reason why we are alive, and then the realization that we're on our way out, and the time is running out really super fast. It can happen in the other way around, of course. I used to have a spreadsheet on my website called Life, and it was a spreadsheet that I mapped out. Each cell was a week of my life, and it went across 52 weeks per line, and anyone can try this at home. 52 cells across, and for each year. And so let's say we take 90 as the year of our death, for sake of argument, and then you plot out between where you are now and 90. So you go from, let's say, for sake of argument, 60 years old, 30 more. There's 30 more rows, and you've got these. And then each week on a Monday morning or a Sunday night, you blank out one of the cells. So you shade it in your favorite color, and you can see the remaining cells that you have left. It's bizarrely powerful when you look at your life as the amount of weeks left. Let's say you have 90, but the kicker in this is then you halve the spreadsheet and say, well, actually, let's not take the 30 years or 40 years left. Let's take 15. And then then what I found is that I started to think, how much am I going to invest on project X or person Y in terms of weeks out of this finite block of weeks? I mean, it's only that many weeks. How much am I going to invest on spending time on Facebook? So I deplatform myself. How much time am I going to spend on Instagram? Deplatform myself. How much time am I going to spend, dealing with bullshit from various different institutions. So basically, I started an elimination diet of bullshit, because I'm not going to invest that many cells, physical and figurative, on stuff that isn't making me feel fulfilled. I'm just not going to do it.
So in the realm of giving people who are listening, and thank you for still doing that if you are, two book recommendations. The first, you mentioned The Denial of Death, which is the title of Ernest Becker's great book written in, I think, in the 70s, and absolutely a worthwhile read today.
Yep.
Phenomenal understanding of our quest for immortality. And then the second is that if you wanted to live until you're 90, that means that you would have 4,450 weeks. How do I know that?
Because you worked it out.
I did, but I had to do a little bit of mental math. Actually, I had on my podcast a brilliant British journalist called Oliver Burkeman, who wrote a book called 4,000 Weeks, which I also highly recommend. And 4,000 weeks is up until 80. So what I did is I did 80, then I had to calculate in my mind how many weeks are in a 10-year block. So it's 4,500, I guess. It's a better number. Yeah. But so take a read of Oliver Burkeman's book, 4,000 Weeks, is another go-to action point.
Brilliant. Well, and subscribers know that Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl is something that around this moment I would also lay in there. And so in closing, Minter, can you tell us how to find all of your stuff online? What are the URLs? How should people get in touch with you? This is your moment.
All right. Well, thank you for that opportunity. So the easy part is I have this name that my parents gave to me that Google likes because it's kind of peculiar. minterdial.com is basically my hub. I'm in social still at MDIAL at MDial on Twitter, Instagram, and such. But if you are interested and have enjoyed this idea of fostering more meaningful conversations, my Dialogos, and by the way, the Logos, of course, is inspired by Frankl. The insertion of meaning in dialogue is on Substack, and the exact URL is minter.substack.com.
Perfect. Good. Well, Minter, thank you so much. This has been, I think we could speak for another 2 hours, and I'm actually now tempted to have another conversation with you and a few other people on this type of call about death. Actually, that topic. So I'll get back to you on that, because I think that it's needed. And but thank you so much, and thanks everyone for listening. And please do check out Minter's Substack. It's I hate receiving emails from subscriptions, and I say this without exaggeration. You are actually now one of probably 3 subscriptions that I have in my inbox, because this is the stuff that triggers my brain's curiosity. So thank you.
Love it.
Everything you're doing. Thanks, mate.